March 16, 1962. A military transport aircraft lifts off from Guam's Andersen Air Force Base. The Lockheed Super Constellation carries 93 Army personnel and 11 crew members toward the Philippines. Their final destination? Saigon. The flight plan is routine. The weather is perfect. The crew has flown this route dozens of times before. 90 minutes into the journey, the aircraft reaches cruising altitude over the Pacific. Radio communication remains steady. The pilot confirms position and heading. Everything proceeds according to protocol. Then, the signal stops. Air traffic controllers try to re-establish contact. Nothing. Emergency frequencies are checked. Silence. Within the hour, one of the largest search operations in Pacific history begins. American and Philippine forces sweep over 200,000 square miles of ocean. Ships crisscross the suspected flight path. Aircraft scan from dawn until dark for 5 consecutive days. They find nothing. No wreckage floating on the surface. No emergency rafts. No fuel slicks marking a crash site. Not a single fragment of the aircraft appears. It is as though the plane simply ceased to exist. But one witness changes everything. An oil tanker named the SS-TL Linzen reports something unusual. Crew members observe a bright flash high in the atmosphere around the time of the disappearance. 2 glowing streaks descend toward the water. The captain logs the observation immediately and contacts naval authorities. The description matches a mid-air explosion, yet military officials never publicly acknowledge this report. The sighting is noted, then buried. No connection to Flight 739 is ever officially made. The aircraft carried functioning emergency locators, multiple backup radio systems, fresh fuel, and no hazardous materials. Every pre-flight check passed inspection. Sabotage is investigated and dismissed. Lightning is ruled out due to clear conditions. No other aircraft were in the vicinity. 104 people vanish over open water. No distress call, no evidence, no explanation. Just empty ocean and unanswered questions. October 21st, 1978. 20-year-old Frederick Valentich departs from Melbourne in a rented Cessna 182L. His destination, King Island, just south of mainland Australia. The evening flight is straightforward. Weather conditions are favorable. Valentich has logged over 150 hours of flight time. He never lands. At 7:06 p.m., Valentich contacts Melbourne Air Traffic Control. He reports an unidentified aircraft flying above him at roughly 1,000 feet. The description is specific. Long metallic shape. 4 bright lights. The object is moving in ways that conventional aircraft cannot. Over the next 6 minutes, his transmissions grow increasingly urgent. The craft circles his plane. It hovers, then accelerates. Valentich states clearly that this is not a normal aircraft. Air traffic control has no other flights in his area. Their radar shows nothing. At 7:12 p.m., Valentich delivers his final message. The strange craft is hovering directly above him again. He confirms it is not an aircraft. Then, a metallic scraping sound fills the transmission. The audio cuts out. Frederick Valentich is never heard from again. Search teams deploy immediately. 1,000 square miles of ocean are searched for 4 straight days. Weather remains clear throughout the operation. No wreckage is located, no oil, no debris. The emergency beacon never activates. Aviation experts examine the radio transcripts. Valentich showed no signs of confusion or panic until the final moments. His position reports were accurate. His navigation was correct. Night flying was part of his training. The official investigation finds no radar evidence of any other aircraft in the area. Multiple witnesses along the Victorian coast report seeing a fast-moving green light that evening. Some describe a hovering circular object. These accounts reach investigators but are never included in the final report. The conclusion: possible disorientation leading to a crash. The evidence suggests something else entirely. December 5th, 1945. 5 Navy torpedo bombers take off from Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station in Florida. Flight 19 consists of experienced pilots conducting a routine training exercise. The mission is simple: fly east to the Bahamas, turn north, then return west to base. Flight time, 3 hours. Weather, clear. 90 minutes after takeoff, radio transmissions begin to change. Flight leader Lieutenant Charles Taylor reports compass malfunctions. Both his compasses have failed. The other pilots confirm the same problem. All 5 aircraft are experiencing identical instrument failures. Taylor believes they have flown too far east and are now over the Florida Keys. Air traffic control tracks them in the opposite direction, northeast of the Bahamas. The further they fly, the more disoriented they become. One pilot transmits something chilling. Everything looks wrong. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should. Fuel runs low. The sun sets. Communication becomes fragmented. The squadron argues about which direction to turn. No consensus is reached. Then the radio goes silent. All 5 aircraft disappear. A rescue plane is dispatched immediately. A Martin Mariner flying boat with 13 crew members heads toward the last known position. 20 minutes after takeoff, it also vanishes. A merchant ship in the area reports seeing an explosion and fireball. No wreckage is ever recovered. The official report lists the cause as unknown. Internal documents reveal disagreement among naval officers. Some argue for mechanical failure. Others point to navigational confusion. Lieutenant Taylor's family insists he was too experienced to simply get lost. 27 men disappear in clear weather over controlled airspace. 6 aircraft vanish within hours. No debris, no survivors, no answers. March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 departs Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. On board, 239 passengers and crew. The Boeing 777 is one of the safest aircraft ever built. 40 minutes into the flight, the plane vanishes from civilian radar as it approaches Vietnamese airspace. The last communication from the cockpit is routine. Good night, Malaysian 370. Moments later, the aircraft disappears from air traffic screens. What happens next defies every aviation protocol. Military radar later reveals the aircraft turned sharply westward. It flew back across the Malaysian peninsula, then headed south into the Indian Ocean. No distress signal was transmitted. The transponder had been manually disabled. Satellite data confirms the aircraft continued flying for over 6 hours after disappearing from radar. The search becomes the largest in aviation history. Dozens of nations participate. Advanced sonar equipment scans thousands of square kilometers of ocean floor. Years pass. The main fuselage is never located. Debris eventually washes ashore on distant beaches. Pieces confirmed as belonging to MH370 appear on islands thousands of miles apart. None provide clues about what happened. Investigators examine every possibility: mechanical failure, hijacking, deliberate pilot action. No theory explains all the evidence. Attention focuses on the captain. Flight simulation data on his home computer shows a route eerily similar to the suspected flight path. Some conclude he planned a deliberate act. Others dispute this, noting he had no history of instability and no apparent motive. A final report in 2018 offers no conclusion. The aircraft was deliberately diverted, but by whom and why remains unknown. The black boxes were never recovered. Billions spent on the search produce no answers. In the 21st century, a 250-ton aircraft disappears completely, not in a war zone, not in secret, during a commercial flight along a major travel route. If this can happen, what else can vanish? June 23, 1950. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 departs New York bound for Seattle with a stopover in Minneapolis. The Douglas DC-4 carries 55 passengers and 3 crew members. As the aircraft crosses Lake Michigan near Benton Harbor, the pilot requests clearance to descend from 3,500 feet to 2,500 feet due to approaching turbulence. Minutes later, all contact ceases. No emergency transmission is sent. No distress beacon activates. Flight 2501 has disappeared. The time is just before midnight. Search operations begin within hours. Coast Guard vessels, Navy ships, and civilian authorities deploy across the lake. Despite limited radar technology, searchers remain optimistic. The lake is large but bordered by populated areas. Surely debris will appear. 2 days later, small fragments of the aircraft and human remains are discovered floating 15 miles offshore. That is all. No fuselage, no wings, no engines. The main wreckage is never found. 70 years later, the bulk of Flight 2501 still lies somewhere beneath Lake Michigan. What makes this case stranger is the simultaneous communication failure. Multiple pilots in the area report intense radio static shortly after the plane disappears. Ground stations log electrical interference that disrupts both communication and radar tracking. Weather conditions are challenging but not unusual. Thunderstorms develop over the lake. Turbulence is expected. But the DC-4 is a reliable 4-engine aircraft. The crew is highly trained. The final transmission mentions no emergency, just a routine request for lower altitude. Searches continue for decades. In 2004, sonar detects promising targets. Divers investigate and find unrelated wrecks. Time and again, leads evaporate. The case remains officially unresolved. The lack of wreckage prevents investigators from determining what happened. Sabotage cannot be ruled out. Neither can mechanical failure or pilot error. How does a large commercial aircraft disappear over domestic airspace with no concrete evidence? The question echoes across the water, unanswered. August 14, 2005. Helios Airways Flight 522 departs Cyprus bound for Prague with a scheduled stop in Athens. The Boeing 737 carries 115 passengers and 6 crew members. Less than 30 minutes into the flight, Greek air traffic control attempts contact. The aircraft has entered their airspace without establishing communication. There is no response. Multiple attempts fail. Fighter jets are scrambled to intercept. What the pilots observe sends shockwaves through aviation circles. The aircraft flies normally but appears completely unresponsive. Through the cockpit window, they see the captain's seat empty. The co-pilot slumped motionless over the controls.
Oxygen masks deployed throughout the cabin, no one moving. The aircraft continues on autopilot for nearly 3 hours. Just before fuel exhaustion, a flight attendant is seen entering the cockpit wearing a portable oxygen mask. He attempts to regain control. It is too late. The 737 runs out of fuel and crashes into mountains near Athens. All 121 people die. The investigation reveals a fatal chain of errors. Maintenance crews left the cabin pressurization system in manual mode before takeoff. As the aircraft climbed, cabin pressure did not adjust automatically. The crew and passengers gradually lost consciousness from oxygen deprivation without realizing what was happening. Questions remain. Why did the crew not recognize the warning alarms? The cabin altitude warning sounded early in the flight. It should have triggered immediate descent. Neither pilot responded correctly. Flight data shows control inputs long after the crew lost consciousness. The flight attendant made heroic final attempts to save the aircraft. His efforts raise painful questions about whether lives could have been saved if warning signs were recognized earlier. The aircraft flew for 3 hours without pilot intervention, guided only by pre-programmed navigation. Air traffic control could not intervene. The military observed but could not act. 121 people died while the plane flew itself toward disaster. May 25, 2003. A Boeing 727 sits on the tarmac in Luanda, Angola. The aircraft once flew for American Airlines, but now operates as cargo transport. It has not flown in over a year. Just before sunset, something impossible occurs. Without clearance, without communication, with its transponder switched off, the Boeing 727 taxis onto the runway and takes off. 2 men are believed to be aboard. Neither is licensed to fly a 727. The aircraft has never been seen again. Airport staff watch in confusion. No one authorized the takeoff. Witnesses describe erratic ground movement as if the pilot is unfamiliar with the controls. The tower attempts contact. No response. No flight plan filed. No transponder code transmitted. The massive jet turns west over the Atlantic Ocean and disappears from radar. U.S. authorities launch an international investigation. The primary suspects are identified as Ben Charles Padilla, an American aircraft mechanic with a private pilot license, and John Mutantu, a Congolese assistant with no flight credentials. Security footage shows both men near the aircraft before its disappearance. Nothing captures the actual boarding or takeoff. The Boeing 727 typically requires a 3-person crew. Maneuvering it alone or with 2 untrained individuals would be extremely difficult. The cockpit features complex analog controls. How it was started, taxied, and flown remains unexplained. The aircraft's fuel capacity gave it a range exceeding 2,400 nautical miles. It could have reached numerous countries or vanished over open ocean. Authorities fear a terrorist scenario. The timing, less than 2 years after September 11th, triggers immediate alerts. NATO and the FBI issue high-priority notices. No trace emerges. No crash site found. No rogue aircraft intercepted. In 2005, the FBI closes its active investigation. 20 years later, no component of the aircraft has surfaced. A full-sized commercial jet vanished in the modern era without leaving evidence. December 19th, 1995. A Kazakh government Antonov AN-72 departs India bound for Kazakhstan. On board, 13 people, including a senior Kazakh military commander, several aides, and crew. The twin-engine jet operates under normal conditions with experienced personnel. The flight is part of a diplomatic mission. Less than 2 hours after departure, as it passes over the Hindu Kush region, the aircraft disappears from radar. No emergency call, no beacon, no crash site. Initial reports suggest possible technical issues, but the Antonov AN-72 is specifically engineered for high-altitude operations. The crew has extensive experience with this aircraft type. The disappearance triggers a joint search by Indian and Kazakh authorities with Russian aviation support. Mountainous terrain and political tensions complicate efforts. Aerial sweeps produce nothing. Satellite scans reveal no wreckage. Ground teams are denied access to high-security zones controlled by military factions. Unofficially, intelligence sources hint at darker possibilities. The general reportedly had access to classified documentation regarding regional arms movements. Some believe the flight may have been intercepted or deliberately diverted. No evidence of hijacking or interference is presented. The transponder ceased transmitting before any anomaly was noted. This is rare in controlled airspace. Without physical evidence, speculation fills the void. Some theorize the aircraft was shot down. Others suggest navigational error and a crash in an unmonitored range. But satellite coverage should have recorded such an event. No heat signature, smoke, or seismic impact was logged. Reports emerge from remote villagers in northern Pakistan who claim to have seen a large plane flying unusually low that night. These accounts are dismissed without thorough investigation. A confidential memo later surfaces within Kazakh archives, indicating suspicions of foul play. The document is heavily redacted. Its authenticity is never confirmed. The general is quietly removed from military records. No memorial is erected. No official cause declared. December 28, 1948. A Douglas DC-3 operated by Airborne Transport disappears during a routine flight from San Juan, Puerto Rico to Miami, Florida. The aircraft carries 29 passengers and 3 crew members. Weather is calm, visibility clear. The plane is nearing journey's end. 50 miles southeast of Miami, within range of radar and radio, the aircraft makes its final transmission, requesting landing clearance. Minutes later, it is gone. No distress signal received. No debris found. The plane never arrives. The DC-3 is robust and reliable. Captain Robert Lindquist is highly experienced and knows the route well. The flight has been uneventful. At approximately 10 p.m., Miami Air Traffic Control acknowledges the crew's last transmission. It is routine. No mention of problems, no urgency. Within moments, all communication stops. The Coast Guard launches immediate search operations across waters off Florida's coast. The region is busy, well patrolled, and relatively shallow in places. Search crews comb the area for days. Not a single piece of wreckage is recovered. No life jackets, no seat cushions, no luggage. The aircraft and 32 people vanish completely. Investigation reveals peculiar details. The radio transmitter experienced intermittent issues before departure. Battery levels were lower than normal, but the aircraft was cleared to fly. The co-pilot's logbook is missing from documentation. Maintenance records showed discrepancies. These oddities suggest poor oversight, but do not explain how a plane could disappear less than an hour from its destination. The most confounding aspect, proximity to multiple radar installations within one of the most heavily trafficked corridors of U.S. airspace. How could it vanish so close to Miami under constant surveillance? The Civil Aeronautics Board concludes with the phrase, "cause unknown." No debris means every explanation remains guesswork. The aircraft was flying confidently toward home, then gone. Sometimes the sky closes its doors without warning.
September 1st, 1983. Korean Airlines Flight 007, a Boeing 747 carrying 269 people, travels from New York to Seoul with a stop in Anchorage. In early morning hours, the aircraft deviates from its route and enters prohibited Soviet airspace over the Kamchatka Peninsula and Sakhalin Island. Despite warnings from Soviet radar and military aircraft, no course correction occurs. At 3:26 a.m., a Soviet fighter jet fires 2 air-to-air missiles. The passenger plane is destroyed. All aboard are killed. Wreckage falls into the Sea of Japan. But this is not a straightforward tragedy. Official accounts claim the autopilot was mistakenly set to the wrong heading, causing it to drift hundreds of miles off course. Yet the deviation was so substantial and lasted so long that many question how it went unnoticed. The aircraft crossed multiple checkpoints without correction. Voice recordings later revealed the crew never discussed any deviation. Some analysts believe the plane was following a deliberate path, possibly shadowing a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft. When it was shot down, it flew near an RC-135 spy plane operating in the same region. Soviet authorities claimed the Boeing 747 was being used for intelligence gathering. Western officials denied this. Many observers remained unconvinced, especially after details emerged about intelligence flights in the region and the crew's failure to respond to communications. Recovery operations were tightly controlled. The Soviet Navy reached the site first and refused international access. For months, they denied locating the black boxes. When finally released, the recordings contained inexplicable gaps. Even more troubling, only a portion of bodies were recovered. Some autopsy reports described injuries inconsistent with high-altitude decompression. Key fuselage parts were never located. The incident nearly sparked international conflict. Both nations maintained incomplete versions of the story. In 1993, Russia handed over black box recordings. They clarified some technical aspects, but failed to explain why the aircraft continued so far off course.